Either that flea hotel is gone by sundown or I'm calling animal control and your boss. My future mother-in-law shrieked from my backyard, pointing at my orange tabby cat Winston, who was peacefully sunbathing on the deck I'd personally reinforced last summer. And another thing, structural engineering is just what people call it when they can't hack it as real architects, she added with a sneer that could curdle milk. Let me back up a bit. I'm Daniel Morrison, 32 years old, a licensed structural engineer who gets genuinely excited about load calculations and properly rated fasteners. I recently bought a modest ranch-style home in Cedar Heights, Missouri, where the neighborhoods have those pleasant tree names and everyone knows which hardware store has the best weekend deals. My fiancée Sarah and I had been planning our engagement party for weeks, a simple backyard cookout with close friends and family. I'd spent the previous weekend personally checking every joist, beam, and connection point on my deck, even adding extra support brackets just to be absolutely certain everything would be perfect for our guests. Enter Patricia Brennan, Sarah's mother, a woman who wears enough perfume to violate air quality standards and treats other people's boundaries like suggestions written in disappearing ink. She introduces herself to strangers by listing her accomplishments from 1987 and calls my cat various creative insults like a disease vector with a god complex. The first time she met Winston, she'd brought a folder of articles about toxoplasmosis and tried to convince Sarah that living with a cat would make her infertile. She once called the health department on a neighbor for having a bird feeder because it attracted wildlife to the suburb. This morning she'd arrived unannounced at 7 a.m., 3 hours before we'd asked anyone to come, carrying a briefcase full of what she called party optimization materials and wearing a blazer in 90-degree weather to maintain authority. She announced she was here to help with party preparations, which apparently meant criticizing everything from my career choice to my pet ownership to the structural integrity of my professionally inspected deck. Patricia unrolled what I can only describe as a manifesto disguised as a party planning checklist. She'd laminated it at the 24-hour print shop and everything. New rule number 1, no animals within 50 feet of food service areas, even though this was my property and Winston lived here. New rule number 2, all pets must wear bells and reflective vests for guest safety. New rule number 3, no discussion of quote boring engineering topics unquote during social gatherings. She started slapping sticky notes on everything like she was conducting a health inspection. One on Winston's favorite chair that read sanitize after creature contact. Another on my grill saying inadequate BTU output. A third on my deck stairs declaring uneven rise height, lawsuit waiting. The situation escalated when Patricia pulled out her phone and called animal control on speaker, introducing herself as the concerned property stakeholder and reporting an unlicensed predator terrorizing the neighborhood. When the dispatcher asked for clarification about what kind of animal, Patricia said, and I quote, technically domestic but behaviorally feral with known bird-murdering tendencies. The poor dispatcher, clearly confused, asked if we were talking about a dog, and Patricia replied, worse, it's one of those cats that thinks it owns the place. Then she started a video call with her book club to get their input on whether she should report me to the Better Business Bureau for false advertising myself as a professional. Things took a sharp turn toward disaster when Patricia decided my deck needed immediate improvements. While I was inside getting burger patties, she flagged down a handyman driving by, someone she'd apparently found on a neighborhood app who claimed he could fix anything with a drill and determination. She negotiated with him in my driveway, promising him $200 cash to make her vision come to life immediately. Without any permits or even basic measurements, she directed him to install what she called a decorative pergola enhancement using materials from my garage including leftover fence posts from a project I'd abandoned for good reason, deck screws that were completely wrong for the application, and I'm not making this up, heavy-duty zip ties for my Christmas decoration supplies. She also raided my workshop and grabbed my good lumber that I'd been saving for winter projects, insisting that I was hoarding materials that could be put to better use. The handyman, whose truck had no company name and whose tool belt looked like it came from a garage sale, started drilling into my carefully maintained deck without even checking for electrical lines or plumbing underneath. Patricia stood over him like a general commanding troops, using terms she'd apparently Googled that morning like load-bearing and tension distribution but applying them completely incorrectly. She insisted he use drywall anchors for outdoor structural connections because they were, quote, heavy-duty and had a higher weight rating on the package. She had this poor handyman, who clearly just needed the quick cash and kept muttering about how this wasn't up to code, attach this monstrosity directly to my deck railing with no proper ledger board, no flashing to prevent water damage, and absolutely zero lateral bracing for wind resistance. When he expressed concern about stability, she handed him the zip ties and said these are rated for 300 pounds each, we'll use 20, That's 6,000 pounds of support. It's basic math. Then she triumphantly draped a massive vinyl banner across it that read "Welcome to the Brennan Family Standards of Excellence," adding significant wind load to an already compromised structure. When I rushed outside and tried to explain the dangers, she waved me off saying, "Honey, I took advanced placement math in high school. I think I understand basic geometry. Triangles are the strongest shape in nature." Here's where things get interesting. My neighbor and Wednesday night poker buddy, Carlos Mendez, happens to be the senior building inspector for Cedar Heights. I quickly snapped photos of Patricia's pergola disaster and sent them to him with a simple message that said "Code violation in progress. Please advise." Carlos texted back immediately with 3 exclamation points and an ETA of 5 minutes. Meanwhile, my other neighbor, Jennifer, had been recording the whole thing on her security camera after Patricia had complained about Jennifer's garden gnomes being, quote, aggressively whimsical, unquote, earlier that morning. Sarah arrived just as her mother was climbing onto the deck to hang additional decorations from her death trap pergola. My wonderful fiancé took one look at the situation, saw my expression, watched her mother wobbling on a structure held together with hardware store rejects and wishful thinking, and said the most beautiful words I'd ever heard. "Mom, get down right now. Daniel literally has a master's degree in making sure things don't fall down. Maybe you should listen to him for once." Carlos pulled up in his official city vehicle, that bright orange polo shirt making him look like the cavalry arriving at dawn. He took one look at the pergola, gently pushed it with 2 fingers, and watched it sway like a drunk uncle at a wedding. Patricia, still convinced of her engineering prowess, scrambled up the deck stairs clutching the 3-tier engagement cake she'd picked up from the grocery store, declaring that if it wasn't safe, she would certainly feel it since she'd always been very intuitive about structural integrity. At that precise moment, as if choreographed by the universe itself, a typical Missouri afternoon breeze caught the Standards of Excellence banner. The pergola twisted, the zip ties stretched and popped like firecrackers, and the entire construction began its slow-motion surrender to gravity. The sound was incredible, a symphony of cracking wood, snapping plastic, and Patricia's shriek that probably registered on seismographs 3 counties over. She tried to save the cake but only managed to stumble backward directly into the inflatable pool I'd set up for my nephew earlier, her designer handbag flying one direction, her cell phone another, and her dignity scattered to the wind. The structure collapsed onto the deck with a spectacular crash that sent neighbors running to their windows. The 3-tier cake exploded like a frosting bomb covering everything in a 10-foot radius, and Patricia found herself sitting chest-deep in chlorinated water, covered in vanilla buttercream and the shattered remains of her authority. Her perfectly styled hair was now a frosting sculpture, her blazer was soaked and stained beyond salvation, and her waterproof mascara had finally met its match. Winston, sensing his moment of triumph, hopped onto a floating cake layer and began delicately licking frosting off his paws while maintaining eye contact with Patricia like he'd planned this all along. Carlos wrote up a formal violation notice for unpermitted construction and reckless endangerment of a regulated structure. He pulled out his tablet and began itemizing every single code violation with the thoroughness of someone who took his job very seriously. The fine for unpermitted structural work came to $8,500, which Patricia was legally responsible for as the person who'd ordered and directed the work. Additionally, she was required to pay for a full structural inspection of my deck by a licensed engineer, another $2,000, and the complete professional removal and repair of damage, which the contractor Carlos called on the spot estimated at $3,000 more after seeing the holes drilled through load-bearing posts. The handyman, who turned out to be unlicensed and uninsured, meant Patricia faced an additional penalty of $5,000 for hiring non-permitted labor for structural work that could have resulted in serious injury. Carlos also noted that because the structure had collapsed with people present, this could be classified as criminal negligence, which carried potential jail time up to 6 months. When she tried to argue that I should pay since it was my property, Carlos pointed out that Jennifer's security footage clearly showed Patricia directing the work against my explicit protests, and that she'd actually committed trespassing by accessing my tools and materials without permission, another misdemeanor charge. He added that the city would be pursuing the maximum penalties due to the severity of the safety violations and her blatant disregard for building codes. The total financial damage hit $18,500, not including the ruined cake, the vet bill when Winston ate too much frosting, and the potential legal fees if she chose to fight the citations in court, which Carlos estimated could easily double the amount. Patricia's face went from red to white to a shade of green that matched my lawn as Carlos handed her the official citations, each one requiring her signature, and informed her that failure to pay within 30 days would result in additional fines, liens against her property, and possible criminal prosecution for endangering public safety with her reckless construction decisions.